Greetings, welcome back. In this and the next lesson, we're going to work on the 5-day forecast section. Okay, let's go to the website openweathermap.org. Then click on API. That's what we need. With this, we can get a 5-day forecast for every 3 hours. So click on API Doc. In fact, there are 2 ways to get the forecast by city name. The first way is to use this URL where we need to insert the requested city instead of city name. The second way is to use this URL. If we know the ID of the city, we can get the forecast by the city ID. Well, after getting the weather details for the current day, we will already know the city ID. Since we already know the city ID, we're going to use this URL. Just copy the URL and then create a variable called forecast base endpoint. As the value of this variable, we set https:// and then paste what we've copied before. We're going to add the city ID with the help of JavaScript. So we can delete this part of the URL. Let's specify that we want the data to be displayed in metric units. Don't forget to add the ampersand at the end. We're also going to add the app ID with the help of JavaScript. Of course, add +weather API key at the end. So let's create a new function called getForecastByCityID and pass the city ID to this function. Let's create the endpoint. Well, it is forecast base endpoint plus ampersand ID equals, and then we add ID. Now we need to make a request for this endpoint. To do this, we type in letResult equals fetch endpoint. The fetch function is an asynchronous function that returns promise. So to make it work, we add the await keyword, and we also need to add the async keyword before the function. Now let's turn this result into a JSON object and assign it to the variable called forecast. Since the JSON function is an asynchronous function, we add the await keyword. Let's display the value of the forecast variable in the console. So, let me explain when we need to call the getForecastByCityID function. Well, first we call the getWeatherByCityName function. As a result, we get the weather details for the current day, and we also get the city ID. As you remember, the getWeatherByCityName function is called when the user hits enter in the search box. So it means that after this, we need to call the getForecastByCityID function. And of course, we have to pass the city ID to this function. Okay, for now, just turn this line of code into a comment, and let's see from where we can take the city ID. For this purpose, let's display the value of the weather variable in the console. Save and refresh the page. After that, open the console. Now let's try to find the weather forecast for New York. Right here, we see the key called ID with some value. This is the city ID. In our case, it is the ID of New York. So we assign the city ID to the variable called cityID. And then we pass the value of city ID to this function. As a result, now in the console, we're going to see the 5-day forecast. Alright, let's check how it works. Type in New York and press the Enter key. And we've got the object, which has the information about the city. And we can also see a list. It is the array of 40 elements. Each element of the array is a separate object with weather data. As you can see, this is the object with the weather data on the 1st June 2020. The time is 3 p.m. And this is the weather forecast for the 1st of June 2020, but the time is 6 p.m. Then the same day, but the time is 9 p.m. and so on. We've connected a 5-day forecast, which includes weather data for every 3 hours. But since we need a daily forecast for 5 days, we need to take 5 objects with the weather data of each day at the same time. For example, it can be a weather forecast for 5 days and the time is 12 o'clock. Please notice that our array of 40 elements is stored in the key called list. So out of this JSON object, we're going to take the array and assign it to the variable called forecastList. To do this, we type in let forecastList equals to forecast.list. Let's create an array called daily. This array has 40 elements, so we need to check every element of this array. And if the time is 12 o'clock, then we need to take that object and assign it to the array called daily. So to check every element of the array, we use the function called for each. We pass the parameter called date to this function. As you can see, the date and time are stored in the key called DTText. So we need to turn this date and time into the object called date. And then out of this object, we're going to take the time. If the time is 12 o'clock, then the object has to be added to the array called daily. Well, before we do this, let's go to the MDN website and search for date. Scroll down a bit. Here's an example of how we can use dates. As you can see, between the date and the time, we have the letter T. While in our case, there is a space between the date and the time. It means that before creation of the object called date, we need to replace the space with the letter T. To do this, first we create a variable called date and assign new date to it. And we need dt_text out of day. To replace the space with the letter T, we add .replace, and in the parentheses we set the empty space for the first argument and the letter T for the second argument, which means JavaScript, please replace the empty space with the letter T. To get the time from the date, we type in let hours equals date.getHours. And let's display the value of the variable called hours in the console. Refresh the page and search for New York. And we've got the numbers 15, 18, 21, 0, 3, 6, 9, and so on. These are the hours. So if the value of the variable called hours equals to 12, then we add this object to the array called daily. As a result, the 5 objects had already been pushed to this array. Let's check it out by typing console.log daily. Okay, we see the 5 objects. The time is 12 o'clock and the date is June 2nd. The time is 12 o'clock and the date is June 3rd. Then the 4th June, the 5th June, and the 6th June. Excellent, it works properly. Now we need this information to be displayed in these 5 blocks, which in HTML are 5 article tags. So the function called updateCurrentWeather updates weather data for the current day. Now let's create a function that will be updating the weather data for the 5-day forecast. Let's call this function updateForecast. We pass the value of the variable called forecast to this function. Here's the div with a class name weatherForecast. We have 5 articles inside of this div. So copy this class name and let's search for this div by its class name. We type in letForecastBlock equals to document.querySelector. And the class name is weatherForecast. Each time before we insert the new weather data to the 5-day forecast, we need to delete all the data which was previously inserted. In other words, we need to delete the content of all the article tags. To do this, we assign a pair of empty quotes to forecastBlock.innerHTML. By adding this line of code, we've just deleted everything that was stored inside forecastBlock. Now we need to create an article for each day of the array called forecast and insert it inside of forecastBlock. So we type in forecast.forEach. First of all, we need to insert the relevant weather image. When it is sunny, then this weather icon has to be inserted. When it is cloudy, then this weather icon has to be added. You can find all the necessary weather icons on the website. You just need to search for icon. And then click several times up to this heading, List of Weather Condition Codes. Click on this link and we see all the weather icons. Let's suppose that we want this weather icon to be displayed on the web page. This is the fixed part of this URL. And in this part of the URL, we need to insert the code of the weather icon. For instance, this icon has the code 09D. So that the weather icon is displayed in high quality, we add @2x and then .png. And we've got the necessary weather image. Each day has its own object. So let's take a closer look. For instance, at the object of this day. We have the key called weather. The array is composed of only one element. And this element has the key called icon with the value 04D. As you can see, this weather icon has the code 04D. So let's create the necessary URL. We type in letIconURL. First, we're going to add the fixed part of the URL. Second, we need to add weather, the element of the array with the 0 index and then the value of the key called icon. That's why we type in day.weather 0 icon. Finally, we add 2x.png. The next thing that we need to do is add a relevant weekday. Well, that's what we will do in the next lesson. Take care and see you in the next one.